8 years is a long time, Miss Monroe. A long time to give a house that was never going to give it back. So take this and write me 2 lines by Friday, and I will see to it that you go home properly. Thank you, ma'am. Is the $2 part of the note, or is it separate? It is a tip, dear. In your country, one leaves a little something for good service, does one not? Nobody here would think to. I thought you should have it once before you go. Ma'am, would you mind if I put these on the wall in the back corridor? Your husband started that wall. There are 12 on it. I think he would have liked these two.
Why does a woman who has just been handed $2 and told to resign by Friday ask, very politely, for permission to keep them?
Why did Madame Ocean,
Who had planned that lunch for a month and rehearsed her lines in the car, stop breathing at the word wall? What had Nam Ji-ho been keeping in the locked drawer of his dead father's desk for 4 years? One page, signed once in his own handwriting, that he had never taken back.
and why, 7 days later, would the buyers from Chungwoo Food Holdings walk out of a head office in Jongno without the company they had already told their own board they owned?
Because the woman standing at the end of that table had cooked with her own hands. Every single dish those buyers had just valued at $80 million. And because the man who actually owned Myeongwol had spent 4 years being unfailingly polite to the wrong person. This is her story, and it starts 8 years earlier in Houston. Talia Monroe learned to cook in her mother's garage. Vera Monroe ran a catering business out of a converted 2-car garage on Cullen Boulevard, with 2 chest freezers, a stolen hotel pass-through shelf, and a hand-lettered sign that said Vera Monroe, food for occasions. By 22, she had put herself through culinary school working 2 shifts, one at a barbecue place on Alameda, and one at a hotel banquet kitchen, where she was the only woman on the hotline. She was good, and she knew she was good, and in Houston that got her exactly as far as sous chef at a Gulf Seafood restaurant with 40 seats and a lease it could not carry. The restaurant closed in March of 2018. Talia was 26, with $1,100, a knife roll, and a resume that nobody in that city was reading that spring. A friend from culinary school had gone to Seoul to teach English and kept sending photographs of markets. Talia looked at those photographs for 2 weeks and then bought a one-way ticket with money she did not really have. Her mother drove her to the airport and did not cry until the car door was closed. The job in Seoul was at a new hotel restaurant that was supposed to open in May. It never opened. The investor pulled out in April, and Talia found herself in a city where she could not read a street sign, on a visa tied to a company that no longer existed, with 6 weeks to find someone willing to sponsor her or go home. She walked into 19 kitchens in 11 days. The 18th let her work a trial and then explained kindly that customers would find her confusing. The 19th was a 32-year-old restaurant in Samcheongdong called Myeongwol, which means bright moon and which had 8 tables and a waiting list of 5 weeks. She went around the block into the service alley and knocked on the back door at 4 in the afternoon. The man who opened it was 70 years old, in a cotton apron, holding a colander of soaked beans. His name was Nam Chang-shik, and he had built Myeongwol out of a single room in 1986 with his wife's dowry and a stove that was already second-hand when he bought it. He looked at her for about 3 seconds. Then he handed her the colander and pointed at a sink. Talia washed dishes at Myeongwol for 4 months, paid in cash badly, and every night at 11 she stayed after service and watched the old man make stock. On the 9th of September he came in on a Sunday when the restaurant was closed and made her stand at his elbow for 6 hours. He had one rule that he repeated so often she learned the phrase before she learned any other. Never taste from the pot. 2 spoons, always. 1 spoon lifts, 1 spoon tastes, and the spoon that tastes never goes back in. And then he would fill a second clean spoon and hold it out sideways to whoever was standing next to him, without looking at them. Food you will not share with the person beside you, he said, is not finished yet. The first time he held that spoon out to her, she took it and tasted it and told him it needed more time. And he laughed so hard he had to put the ladle down. In the back corridor of Myeongwol, between the walk-in and the staff toilet, there was a wall. On the wall, under a sheet of scratched acrylic, a single 10,001 note was taped flat with a date written under it in ballpoint. It was the first money the restaurant had ever taken, on the 11th of April, 1986. Every time Myung-wol opened another house, another note went up beside it, with another date. By the time Talia arrived, there were 9 on that wall, and Nam Chung-shik walked past it 11 times a day without ever once looking at it.
Which is how you can tell what a man actually cares about.
What Talia did not know yet, standing in that corridor in her 4th month with a colander on her hip, was that a 10th note would go up on that wall with her food behind it.
Or that the last thing ever taped to it would be worth $2.
Nam Ji-ho came home in the spring of 2019, and he came home badly. He was 32, an architect, 6 years into a practice in Chicago that he had built himself and liked more than he liked most people. He came back because his father had been diagnosed with stomach cancer in February and had told nobody, and because his mother had finally called him at 2 in the morning Chicago time and said one sentence and hung up. For the first 8 months he was a man in a suit standing in a kitchen doorway with a phone in his hand in the way. He started coming in at 2 in the morning, after service, when the kitchen was empty except for the woman scrubbing the flat top. That was how Talia Monroe and Nam Ji-ho actually met, over a burnt pot he was trying to fix before anyone saw it. She fixed it for him. Then she made him do it again himself. Wrong 4 times, until he got it, which took until 4:10. He asked why she had not simply done it herself and let him go home. And she said, "Because you are going to have to make this for him in October and you are not going to be able to call me at 2 in the morning." He did not understand what she meant until October. By October of 2019, Nam Chang-shik could not taste anything. That is what the treatment did to him first, and it took everything else after. What he no longer had was the one instrument he had used to build his entire life. So he borrowed one. For 11 months, Nam Chang-shik cooked with Talia Monroe's tongue. He would build a stock and she would taste it and tell him, in the vocabulary they had invented together, exactly where it was. Too sweet at the back. Thin in the middle. It is there but it is late. It arrives after you swallow.
And he would nod and adjust, and she would taste it again.
That is not helping. That is being made responsible for another man's life's work, every day for 11 months, at 27 years old, in a language you are still learning. Twice a week he made her cook the whole menu alone while he sat on a stool by the door, with a cane between his knees and corrected her with 2 words at a time. And when it was right, he still filled a second spoon and held it out sideways without looking at her. By the summer of 2020, Myung-wol had grown from 3 restaurants to 6. Now his food could be reproduced exactly by somebody 32 years younger who could stand for 16 hours. Opening a kitchen means living in it for 6 weeks, teaching 12 people who resent you a method that has no written form, until they can do it without you. She opened 2 that year, and 3 more the year after. And she did it in Korean. Because by then she had studied Korean for 2 years out of a workbook at 4 in the morning, and she had learned the part a cookbook does not teach, which is how to correct a 50-year-old man in front of his colleagues without taking his face away. Nam Chang-shik died on the 4th of November, 2021 at home. 4 days after he had walked into the Samcheong-dong kitchen for the last time, and stood at the pass for 11 minutes. He had held out a second spoon that day, and Talia had taken it and told him it was perfect, which was not true, and both of them knew it was not true, and he had smiled at her and gone home. The funeral was 3 days, and Talia worked all 3 of them, because 400 people had to be fed, and that is what the kitchen is for. She did not sit down once. She met his widow properly for the first time on the second night, in the corridor by the wall of notes, at 1:30 in the morning. Madame Oh Seon-young was 59 then, in white mourning, immaculate, with a face that had been beautiful for a very long time, and had learned exactly what to do with it. She looked at Talia's stained apron and her forearms and her hair pinned back under a cloth. She said in English, "Thank you for helping in the kitchen. It is very kind." Then she asked one of the servers, in Korean, to make sure the American girl was paid something extra for the weekend. Talia understood every word, said nothing, and went back in and started the next 400 bowls. 12 days after the funeral, Nam Ji-ho signed a single page of paper in a lawyer's office in Jongno with his mother sitting beside him. His father had left him everything. Not most of it,
All of it.
100% of Myeongwool Holdings, which held the freeholds, the leases, the brand, and every one of the group, left to an only son who had not wanted it and had said so out loud at 19. Jiho was 34, had buried his father 11 days earlier, could not eat, could not sleep, and was being asked to run 12 kitchens he could not cook in.
So he signed a voting proxy appointing his mother to exercise all of his rights as shareholder
At her discretion, until such time as he revoked it in writing. It took him about 40 seconds. He put his copy in the bottom left drawer of his father's desk on the 4th floor in Jongno. And he locked the drawer. And for 4 years he did not open it. What Nam Jiho did not know yet was how much a piece of paper can cost when you leave it in a drawer. Or that the bill for those 40 seconds would be presented in full to somebody else entirely. Madam Oh Seon-yong took the chair of Myeongwool Holdings in January of 2022, and she was extremely good at it. She had kept the books of that restaurant for 35 years at a kitchen table, and within 18 months she had taken the group from 9 restaurants to 12 and the revenue from 41 billion won to 78. She did all of it without ever once learning the name of the woman cooking the food.
not because she could not remember it.
A name is a decision, and she had decided.
In the staff system, Talia Monroe was employee number 447, grade 2, kitchen assistant.
On the name badge clipped to her jacket, where the Korean staff had their names in 2 colors, hers said kitchen. At the staff meal,
the 12 chefs of the group sat at the long table and the assistants sat at the 2 round tables by the service door.
And when Talia sat at the long table in her second week under the new arrangement,
a young manager came over and asked her with real embarrassment if she would mind.
She picked up her bowl and moved, and she ate at the round table for the next 4 years,
and every single cook in that kitchen watched her do it.
That mattered later, more than anybody in the family understood.
The first crack in the story arrived in a cardboard box in March, and it arrived by accident.
A courier delivered 900 new group menus to the service door instead of the office door, and Talia, the only person in the building at 6 in the morning, opened the box to check the count.
Inside, on the second page, was a section that had never existed before, headed Our Kitchen. It listed 3 names, with photographs. Ru Byung-chol, executive chef, 41 years with the founder, and 2 younger Korean men who ran Yeouido and Pangeo, both of whom Talia had personally trained.
Under the photographs, in italic, a sentence said that the dishes of Myeongwool are prepared exactly as they were in 1986,
in the founder's own method, by the kitchen he built.
Talia stood in the corridor and read that sentence 4 times.
11 of the 14 dishes on that menu had been finished, balanced, and standardized by her in that building.
In the 11 months when a dying man could not taste his own food. She closed the box, taped it, wrote office on the top in marker, and carried it up 2 flights of stairs.
Ru Byung-chol found her at 9, with a menu in his hand, and he could not look at her. He said, "My name is on your food." She said, "Your name should be on that menu at GSE. You have been here 41 years.
He said, "That is not what I said."
And then the old man stood in the middle of his own kitchen and could not think of a single thing to do about it, which is the moment Talia Monroe understood that nobody was coming. The second piece of proof, she went looking for herself, and it took her 4 months to have the nerve.
In July, she asked the head office in writing for a copy of her own employment record.
7 consecutive employment contracts, each one for exactly 12 months, each one titled Kitchen Assistant, Grade 2.
7 visa sponsorship renewals, all signed by the group's operations director, Shin Chul-min.
And on every single one of them the same pattern, once she laid them out on the floor and put them in order.
Each renewal had been submitted in the last week before her permission to remain in the country expired.
Not once early, not once with a month to spare.
7 years in a row, at the last possible moment,
by a man whose office was a 9-minute walk from hers.
Talia sat on the floor of a rooftop room in Mangwon at 1 in the morning with her whole legal life in Korea laid out in 9 pages around her. And she understood the arrangement completely. She was not being kept. She was being renewed.
And a thing that is renewed once a year is a thing that can be allowed to lapse quietly, on a Friday, by somebody who never has to say a word about it.
She put the 9 pages in a plastic folder, and the folder in a biscuit tin she had brought from Houston, and the tin on the shelf above the door. The final piece arrived a year and a half later, and it was the one that changed what she did with her hands. The group commissioned an operations manual, and for 5 months a consultant with a camera followed Talia Monroe around a kitchen and photographed everything she did. Her hands on a knife, her thumb testing the edge of a curd, the exact angle at which she held a ladle to skim. Her timings, written on a whiteboard in her own handwriting, in Korean and in English, because the young cooks read both. 406 pages. On the inside cover, under the title, there was an author line. Prepared by Oga Culinary Consulting, it said, Managing Director, Oh Seon-young. Talia's name appeared nowhere in 406 pages. Her hands appeared on 231 of them. And somewhere around page 300, she stopped being angry and started being extremely calm, which anyone who worked with her will tell you was always the more dangerous of the two. Because on page 311, in a section about staffing ratios, was a sentence that told her exactly how the family thought about what she was. The method described in this manual is fully transferable and does not depend on any individual operator. Talia Monroe read that sentence and closed the book and said out loud, in an empty room, to nobody, all right. She did not decide to take anything from them. What she decided that night was much smaller and much harder. She decided that if the method did not depend on any individual operator, then she would make absolutely sure that it did. She would teach it to every single person in those 12 kitchens, personally, by hand, until 41 cooks in 4 cities held her method in their bodies and knew whose hands they had learned it from. And then, once, on the 40th anniversary of the restaurant, she would ask for her name on the menu. And if the answer was no, she would take her knives and go home to Houston and open something small on Alameda with her mother's name on the sign. What Talia Monroe did not know yet was that the answer would come, and it would come on time, and it would not come in words at all. It would come on a small brass tray, at the end of a Sunday lunch, in front of 2 women she had cooked for 100 times. She started in January of 2024, and she started with the worst kitchen in the group. Talia asked Shin Chelman for 6 weeks in Ansan, and he gave them to her immediately because sending the American to Ansan solved a problem for him and cost him nothing. She took the first train out of Mangyeon at 4:05 in the morning for 41 days. She did not fix Ansan's food. She taught Ansan's food to Ansan. There were 9 cooks in that kitchen, and she stood at the elbow of each one of them for 4 days, the way an old man had once stood at hers, and she made them do it wrong 400 times until it was right. And at the end of every single shift, before anyone was allowed to go home, she filled a second clean spoon and held it out sideways to whoever was standing beside her, without looking at them. 9 people in Ansan learned that gesture in 6 weeks. Then Bisan, then Pangyo, then Ilsan, then the 2 in Gangnam, then Daegu, then Songdo. Then Pangyo, then Ilsan, then Ilsan. Then the 2 in Gangnam, then Daegu, then Daegu, then Songdo. Then Daegu, then Songdo. 6 weeks at a time, kitchen after kitchen for 2 years. 41 cooks. She learned all 41 names and how many children they had, and which ones were sending money home. She taught them the 2 spoons, and made them promise that the last spoon of every service went sideways to the person beside them. 41 cooks in 4 cities, all of them doing a small strange thing at the end of every shift that they had learned from the same woman. None of them called her chef because they were not allowed to. They called her Seonsangnim, which means teacher, and which no manager in that group ever thought to prohibit because it did not appear on any organizational chart. Nam Ji-ho was there for almost none of it, which he has never forgiven himself for. He had a title, chief executive, and a business card, and no votes. A lease he wanted to end was not ended. A supplier his father had used for 30 years was replaced by one his mother's cousin had recommended. A menu change he approved in March appeared unchanged in June. And every time, if he pushed, his mother would put her hand flat on the table and say, in the same voice she had used when he was 11, "We will discuss it at home." For 2 years, Nam Ji-ho negotiated with his own mother to buy back the control of a company he already owned. She listened to every offer with genuine warmth and thanked him. And said, "Ji, why are we talking about paper?" He never once said the word proxy out loud to her, and he never once opened the bottom left drawer. Because to do that would be to say, in front of his father's photograph, that his mother could not be reasoned with. And that is a thing sons will pay almost anything not to have to say. What he did instead was drive to Anson at 11 at night with 2 coffees. He would find her wherever the 6 weeks had put her, and they would sit on a crate in a service alley with the extractor roaring above them. And she would fall asleep against his shoulder for 9 minutes and wake up and go back in. She said, "I want to be the person whose name is on the food I cook. And I want to eat at the long table, and I do not want either of those things given to me." He said, "They are already yours. They are just not written down." And Talia Monroe said the sentence he would think about every day for the rest of his life. "Ji-ho," she said, "everything in this world that is real to me is written down somewhere." That is what a country does to you when you are not from it. There were 2 people in Seoul she told the truth to, and the first was Deja Carter, 37, from Detroit. 9 years teaching English in Mangwon and the first black woman Talia had spoken to in that city. It was Deja who asked the question that nobody else did, in the autumn of 2024, with her feet on the table. She said, "Tal, what happens to all of it if you get hit by a bus?" Talia said, "They open the manual." Deja said, "The manual with the pictures of your hands and somebody else's name on it." And Talia looked at the wall for a while and then said, "Yes." The other was her mother, on the phone at 6 in the morning Seoul time. Vera Monroe was 63, still catering, still in the garage. And she had exactly one opinion about her daughter's life in Korea, and she gave it about once a quarter. "Baby," she would say, "you are cooking a dead man's food for people who won't say your name at a table. Come home and cook your own." And Talia would say, "I'm not finished." And her mother would say, "That's what worries me." What neither of them knew yet was that the finish line Talia had drawn for herself, the 40th anniversary in April of 2026, was already circled on a completely different calendar. Or that a company in Uido had already put a number on her hands, and the number was 108 billion won. Madame Oh Seon-young found out about her son in February of 2025, and she found out the way that generation always finds out, which is from a driver. The company driver mentioned, meaning nothing by it, that the chief executive had asked to be dropped in Anson twice that month and had said not to wait. She did not ask her son a single question about it. On the 3rd of March, employee 447 was informed of a promotion. Talia Monroe was appointed kitchen supervisor, grade 3, at the Songdo restaurant, with a raise of 140,000 won a month, effective immediately. Songdo is a beautiful place to work if you live in Songdo. From a rooftop room in Mangwon, it is 2 hours and 10 minutes each way, on 3 trains and a bus, for a shift that starts at 6 in the morning and ends after midnight. It was not a punishment. That was the elegance of it. It was a promotion, in writing, with a raise, and if the American girl declined a promotion, then the American girl had declined a promotion, and that goes in a file too. Talia read the memo standing up in the corridor by the wall of notes, said nothing to anybody, and got up at 3:15 the next morning and went to Songdo. She did it for 9 days. On the 10th day, the memo was rescinded and she was returned to Samcheong-dong, and the reason given was an operational review. Nam Ji-ho had walked into his mother's office and, for the first time in 3 years, raised his voice. He was proud of himself for about an hour. Then he sat in his father's chair and understood, all at once and far too late, what he had just done. He had not protected her. He had confirmed her. For 3 years his mother had been dealing with an inconvenient foreign employee, and in 11 minutes he had told her, at a volume the 2 secretaries outside could hear, that the inconvenient foreign employee was the thing he cared about most in the world. He called Talia that night and told her what he had done, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "All right." Now she knows where to press. Madame Oh Seon-young did not press for 4 months, which is how you can tell she was not a hysterical woman. On the 11th of August, a customer at the Gangnam Nonhaean restaurant reported severe food poisoning after a lunch service and named a dish. It was the chilled soybean noodle that only ran in summer. And the batch that day had been finished and passed by Talia Monroe at 9:40 in the morning. The district health office opened an inspection the following Tuesday. An inspection like that is not a trial. It is a river of paper. Talia asked the head office for the Nonhyun logs, and Shin Chelman refused her in writing. Because a grade 3 is not a registered food safety manager, he refused her kindly. He said everything kindly. That night Talia sat on the floor in Mangwon and did the arithmetic that every foreign worker in the world does at some point. A confirmed sanitation violation attached to her name meant no sponsor would touch her. No sponsor meant no visa. No visa meant 30 days. 30 days meant Houston, at 33, with a knife roll and a resume that said kitchen assistant, grade 2. 7 years, for a file. She did not call Ji-ho, and she has never fully explained why. Though Deja Carter has a theory, which is that Talia had already worked out that anything he touched got worse, and she was right. She called Roo Byung-chul at 6 in the morning. What he did that morning was drive to the Nonhan restaurant, unlock a steel cupboard with a key that was not supposed to exist anymore, and take out 491 days of handwritten temperature logs, in duplicate, initialed twice daily. Because Nam Chang-shik had made that rule in 1991 and Roo Byung-chul had never once been told he could stop. Every single one of them was initialed in the same handwriting for the morning check. T. He carried the box into the district health office himself, at 69 years old, and sat there for 4 hours until somebody would take it. The inspection closed on the 9th of September with no violation recorded against any member of staff. The source was traced to a chilled delivery from a supplier that had been changed 11 months earlier, over the objection of the executive chef on the recommendation of a cousin. Nobody in that family ever said one word about it to anyone, ever. Madam Oh Seon-yong sent a fruit basket to the Nonhaen kitchen and a personal note to Roo Byung-chul thanking him for his diligence. Talia got a photocopy of the closure letter in her pigeonhole, with no cover note. She kept it. It went in the biscuit tin, with the 9 pages. For 7 years Talia Monroe had behaved like a guest. After September she behaved like a woman who had already decided how this ended, and was simply working her way toward the date. She stopped asking. She stopped explaining. She was not rude and she was never once late, and she stopped, entirely, hoping. What Talia did not know yet was that the fruit basket had not been an apology. It had been a measurement. And the number it returned was that this woman could not be pushed out quietly, would not resign, and could not be blamed for anything. Which left, in the end, exactly one method. Chungwoo Food Holdings made its first approach in October of 2025, and it made it to the chair, not to the chief executive. Chungwoo is not a restaurant company. Their proposal was 108 billion won for 100% of Myeongwool Holdings. Roughly $80 million. What was in the 14th paragraph was the retail licensing schedule. 9 of Nam Chang-shik's dishes, industrialized, retort-sealed, shelf-stable for 11 months, in a plastic tray with his handwriting printed on the film, in 6,200 stores by the end of the following year. Madame Oh Seon-yong read that schedule and saw her husband's name on 6,200 shelves. Her son read the same schedule and saw a man who had once thrown out an entire day's stock because a delivery had sat in the sun for 20 minutes. They had the fight on the 18th of November in the boardroom in Jongno in front of 4 people. It lasted 9 minutes and Nam Ji-ho lost it on the first one because his mother did not argue with him at all. She simply asked, pleasantly, whether he was voting against it. And he heard himself say that he was. And she said, of course, and turned to Shin Chul-min and asked him to record that the chair, holding the voting rights of the majority shareholder by instrument dated the 16th of November 2021, had voted in favor. That was the first time the word instrument was ever said out loud in that room. Ji-ho went upstairs and opened the bottom left drawer of his father's desk for the first time in 4 years. He read the page 11 times sitting in his father's chair, and the next morning he took it to a lawyer. Not the family firm. A 35-year-old corporate lawyer named Young-min Taek in a small office in Siacho. chosen out of a directory because he had never heard of Myongwol. Young Min-taek read the page twice, put it down and asked one question. Who told you this was permanent? Ji-ho said nobody. Nobody ever said it was. The instrument was a voluntary proxy, granted by a competent adult, revocable at will, at any time, for any reason or none. Not a trust, not a transfer, not a sale. He owned 100% of Myongwol Holdings and had owned 100% of it every single day for 4 years. And the entire authority of the chair of that company rested on a single sheet of paper that could be ended by a letter. One letter. Registered post. Effective on receipt. Young Min-taek said, "Do you want me to draft it?" And Nam Ji-ho said yes. The letter was drafted on the 21st of November, 2025. It was 4 paragraphs long. He did not send it. Sending that letter meant walking into a boardroom and removing his mother from a company in front of 11 men who had known her for 30 years. 4 days before her 64th birthday. It meant that the sentence people said about the Nam family would change forever, and it would never change back. Sending the letter meant admitting that she had been managing him since the day of the funeral, and that the price of his good manners had been paid every single day in 12-month contracts by a woman who ate at the round table. So he put the letter in the drawer with the proxy and locked it, and told himself the same thing he had told himself for 4 years. Not yet, let me do it properly. He drove to Mangwon that Friday and asked Talia Monroe to marry him. On the roof, in the cold, badly, with a ring in his coat pocket that he had been carrying since August. And she said no. She did not say never. She sat down on the parapet in her coat and held his hands and told him the truth, which was worse than a no. She said, "If I marry you now, everything I have built in that kitchen becomes something you gave me." She said 41 cooks in 4 cities know exactly what I did. If I put on a ring, by Monday there will be one story about me in that company and it will not be the true one. And I will never get the true one back. She said, "I am not asking you for a title. I am asking you for 11 months. In April, it is the 40th anniversary. I am going to stand up in front of your mother and the board and ask once for my name on the menu, with the numbers in Korean. And then, whatever she says, I will marry you the week after." Ji-ho said, "And if she says no?" And Talia said, "Then I will marry you in Houston, and she can find out from the driver." He laughed, and then he stopped laughing, because he understood that she had just handed him a date and that he had a letter in a drawer and 11 months to find the courage to send it. What Talia Monroe did not know yet was that the 40th anniversary of Myongwol had already been booked by somebody else, for something else entirely. Or that a due diligence team in Uido had just begun asking a question that nobody in that family had ever thought to ask. Due diligence began on the 12th of January, 2026. For 9 weeks, 4 people from an accounting firm in Uido sat in a meeting room on the 3rd floor in Jongno and asked for everything. The problem was not in the books. The problem was a single line item on the valuation, and it was the largest one. Of the 108 billion won, the freeholds and leases and fittings and cash came to 43. The remaining 65 billion was booked as brand and proprietary culinary assets. 65 billion won, roughly $48 million, for a recipe book and a reputation. And on the 4th of March, an operational auditor 29 years old and 3 years out of university asked the question in a way that could not be answered with a document. She said, "I understand the method is documented. I am asking who executes it." Shin Chul-min said the group had 12 kitchens, 41 trained cooks and a 400-page manual. The auditor said, "Yes." "Who trained the 41? There was a pause in that room of about 4 seconds that later turned out to be the most expensive 4 seconds in the history of Myongwol Holdings. Because Shin Chul-min told the truth in the smallest possible words, because he was under a professional obligation, and because he was, in the end, an accountant. He said, "There is a senior kitchen employee who has led the openings. 7 12-month contracts. Grade 3. Visa sponsored, renewed annually, expiring in June. No non-compete. No key person clause. No employment protection of any kind.
A junior analyst wrote 2 lines in the risk index that would eventually detonate a company. Culinary asset value appears materially dependent on one individual. That individual is on a rolling 12-month contract with no retention instrument, and a work visa expiring within 90 days of completion. On the Thursday, Chung Woo's deal lead requested a site interview with the individual concerned at her place of work before final signature. Madam Oh Seon-yong read that request on the 19th of March in her office, with the door closed, and she understood exactly what would happen if Chung Woo ever interviewed Talia Monroe. Either the buyer discovered that 65 billion won of the price was standing in a back kitchen on a rolling contract and repriced the deal down by a third. Or far worse, the buyer decided that what they were actually purchasing was her and made her the condition of the sale, and wrote her into the agreement as a named executive of a company that Oh Seon-yong had run for 4 years. Either way, on the day of signature, everyone in that room would know exactly whose hands the $80 million had been sitting in. The individual concerned had to be gone before the site visit. Not fired, which creates a record and a claim. Not transferred, which had already failed. Resigned, voluntarily, in writing. Before the 24th of April, on the 3rd of April, a monthly food magazine published a long profile marking the 40th anniversary of Myung-wol, written by Choi Yeon-soo, who was 45 and had been eating in that dining room since she was a student. On page 6, in the middle of a paragraph about the group's expansion, was one sentence. The consistency across all 12 houses is remarkable, and it is an open secret in Jongno that it belongs less to the manual than to the American chef who has quietly cooked the founder's menu in the Samcheongdong kitchen for 8 years. 29 words. Choi Yeon-soo did not use her name, because she had asked for an interview and had been told by the head office that the individual was not available. Madam Oh Seon-yong read those 29 words on the morning of the 3rd of April with a cup of tea in front of her, and she did not finish the tea. The 40th anniversary was on the 11th. They held it in the Samcheongdong dining room, closed to the public, 40 people, the board and the 12 chefs and the founder's friends. Talia Monroe cooked all of it, 14 courses, and then took off her apron in the corridor by the wall of notes, and put on a plain dark jacket she had bought for that evening in February, and walked into the dining room. She had prepared for 11 months. She stood at the end of the table and she was completely calm, and she spoke for 90 seconds. And then she said, "I have cooked this menu for 8 years. I have opened 9 of the 12 kitchens and trained 41 of the cooks who are eating tonight. On the 14th of this month my contract renews. I am asking the board to renew it as executive chef of the group, with my name on the menu beside Chef Ru, at a grade appropriate to the work. I am not asking for anything I have not already been doing." Then she stopped, and she waited, standing up, in a room of 40 people, for 9 seconds. Ru Byung-chul stood up. The old man got to his feet at his own table with his hands at his sides and did not say a word, because he did not have any, and simply stood there, which at 69 and 38 years of service is the loudest thing a man can do. 4 of the young chefs stood up after him. Nam Ji-ho started to stand and his mother put her hand flat on the tablecloth in front of him, and he did not. He has to live with that. Madam Oh Seon-yong smiled at Talia Monroe with what looked to at least half the room, like real warmth. And she said, "Thank you. We are all so grateful for your hard work." Then she said the sentence that ended 8 years. "You are not a chef, dear. You are very good hands." It is not the same thing, and it is not unkind to say so. She turned to the table and proposed a toast to the founder, and 40 people picked up their glasses because what else does a room do? Talia Monroe said thank you for your time in Korean, and walked out through the kitchen and finished breaking down the pass, and went home at 2:10 in the morning. On the way out, she stopped in the corridor and looked at the wall of notes properly. The way you look at something you were saying goodbye to. There were 12 now. What she did not know yet was that there would be a 13th, that it would go up 8 days later, and that it would be worth $2. The lunch was booked for Sunday the 19th of April, in the private room at Samcheongdong, for 4 people at 1 o'clock. Madam Oh Seon-yong brought 2 friends, both of whom had eaten Talia's food perhaps 100 times over 8 years, and neither of whom had ever met her.
Shin Chilman was there, standing with a folder he did not open. Talia cooked the lunch herself because Sunday lunch in the private room was always hers. At the end of it, at 2:20, a server came into the kitchen and said that the chair would like to thank the kitchen personally. That happens perhaps twice a year, and it is a nice thing. And Talia washed her hands and took off her apron and put on a clean jacket and went out. On the table, in front of the empty chair opposite the chair's own, there was a small brass tray. On the tray were 2 American $1 bills, folded once, and a Myongwol comment card, face up, with 4 lines written on it in beautiful handwriting. For your ticket home. Please resign by Friday. It is kinder this way. Talia Monroe stood at the end of that table with her hands at her sides and read it from where she was, without touching it, which took about 3 seconds. Madame Oh Seon-young said, 8 years is a long time to give a house that was never going to give it back, Miss Monroe. She said, so take this and write me 2 lines by Friday, and I will see to it that you go home properly. One of the 2 friends looked at her lap. The other one did not. Talia picked up the card and read it again at reading distance, politely, the way you read something you have been handed. Then she said, thank you, ma'am. Is the $2 part of the note, or is it separate? Madame Oh Seon-young laughed once, warmly, because she thought the girl had not understood. It is a tip, dear, she said. In your country, one leaves a little something for good service, does one not? Nobody here would think to. I thought you should have it once before you go. And Talia Monroe said, I see. Thank you for explaining. She put the card in the breast pocket of her jacket and picked up the 2 folded dollars and held them in her closed hand. She did not raise her voice. She did not say one word about 8 years, or 11 dishes, or 406 pages, or a box of temperature logs carried into a health office by a 69-year-old man. She said, will there be anything else, ma'am? And when the chair said no, thank you, Talia turned around and walked to the door of the private room, and then stopped with one hand on the frame and turned back, the way you do when you have remembered something small. She said, ma'am, would you mind if I put these on the wall in the back corridor? She said, your husband started that wall. There are 12 on it. I think he would have liked these too. Madame Oh Seon-young did not answer her. She sat perfectly still at the head of the table with her hands folded and her face arranged, and something went out of her at the word wall, and the 2 friends saw it happen and spent the rest of the year not talking about it. Talia Monroe said, thank you for lunch, and went back into the kitchen, and finished the service, and did not tell one single person. That was Sunday. She went home to Mangwon at 11 and sat on the floor with the $2 flat on the low table in front of her and her phone face down. She did not call Jiho. She called Houston at 11 at night Seoul time, which is 9 in the morning in Texas, and Vera Monroe answered on the second ring with a mixer running in the background. Talia said, Mama, I'm coming home. There was a silence, and the mixer stopped, and her mother said, all right, baby. When? And Talia said, June. My visa runs out in June anyway. And Vera Monroe, who is 63 years old and has never in her life said the obvious thing when the useful thing was available, said, do you want me to be sad with you, or do you want me to start looking at that unit on Almeda? And her daughter laughed and then cried for about 40 seconds and then said, look at the unit. Then Talia Monroe wrote her resignation. Nam Jiho found out on Monday, at 11 minutes past 1 in the morning, from a 24-year-old mine cook. M. Chai-won had been clearing the private room on Sunday afternoon and had seen the tray, and had spent 34 hours failing to decide what to do, and had finally sent the chief executive a photograph of a brass tray with $2 bills on it and no message at all. He drove to Samcheong-dong and let himself into the kitchen at 1:30 in the morning and stood in it alone. Then he went to the corridor and looked at the wall of notes for a long time. Then he drove to Jongno, went up to the 4th floor, unlocked the bottom left drawer of his father's desk, and took out 2 pieces of paper. It was 11 minutes past 2 on Monday morning, the 20th of April. On Monday morning he sat down with Youngmin Taek in Seocho for 4 hours and asked him a question that made the lawyer put down his pen. He said, if I revoke it, I get the votes back. I understand that. What I am asking is different.
He said, "How do I give the whole thing away?" Young Min Taek said, "Give what away?" And Nam Ji-ho said, "All of it, the holding company. 100%. To a person. The lawyer asked whether he was being coerced, whether he had debts, and whether the person knew. Ji-ho said no, no, and then he said she is going to say no as well, so it has to be finished before she is asked. On Monday afternoon, while Talia Monroe was standing at a stove in Samcheong-dong, work began on a deed of gift, a board resolution, a revocation notice, and a stock transfer of 100% of the issued shares of Myongwol Holdings Company Limited. On Tuesday, Talia handed her resignation letter to Shin Chul-min in person. And then he did something that surprised everybody who has ever heard this story, including Shin Chul-min. He asked her to sit down, and he closed the door, and he said, in Korean, "I've signed your papers 7 times. I always sign them late. I want you to know that I knew what I was doing when I did that." She said, "I know you did." He said, "I am sorry." She said, "Thank you." That is not the same as being sorry to the next one. And Shin Chul-min sat with that for a moment and said, "No. It is not." By Tuesday night, 41 cooks in 4 cities knew. Nobody organized it. Nobody wrote anything down. Not one person resigned, which is the part the family completely failed to notice. What happened instead was that in 12 kitchens across 4 cities, quietly, without discussion, every cook began writing everything down. In their own notebooks. In their own handwriting. To take with them. What Madame Oh Seon-yong did not know yet was that she had 4 days left as chair of Myongwol Holdings. Or that the woman she had given $2 to had not, at any point in 8 years, asked her for anything except a name on a menu. On Wednesday the 22nd of April, at 4 in the afternoon, Nam Ji-ho drove to a small house in Seoul with a vegetable garden in front of it and asked Roo Byung-chul to witness a document. He said, "Does she know?" Ji-ho said, "No." Roo Byung-chul said, "Your father would have done this 6 years ago." Ji-ho said, "My father did do it. He wrote it down and left it to me. I am the one who put it in a drawer." And the old man who had worked 38 years for that family and had stood up in a dining room with nothing to say, signed his name as witness in handwriting that was not entirely steady. Talia Monroe was in the Samcheong-dong kitchen at 4 in the morning on Thursday the 23rd. Breaking down the last delivery she would ever take in that building, when the service door opened. Ji-ho came in with a plain folder under his arm and stood on the other side of the pass and did not say hello. He said, "I need you to read something standing up, because you will not sit down for it." The first page was a revocation of the proxy dated the 16th of November 2021, to be delivered that morning. The second was a deed of gift, executed the previous day, witnessed, notarized, transferring 100% of the issued share capital of Myongwol Holdings Company Limited, together with the freeholds, the leases and the brand, to Talia Monroe of Mangwon-dong, Seoul, for consideration of 10,000 won and love and affection. She read it 4 times. Her hands did not shake, which he noticed, and which he says he will remember when he is old. She said, "No." He said, "I know." She said, "Ji-ho, no. I told you in November. If you give it to me, it becomes something you gave me and I will spend the rest of my life being the woman who was given a company." He said, "I am not giving you anything. I am returning it." He said, "My father left me $80 million of a company. 43 million of that is buildings and cash and I did not make it. 65 million of it, on the auditor's own page, is the food. The food is you. It has been you since October of 2019, when a dying man borrowed your tongue and never gave it back." He said, "I have been the legal owner of your work for 4 years, and I did nothing with that except be polite to my mother. This is not a gift, Talia. This is the correction of a very long theft that I was too well brought up to stop." And Talia Monroe stood in a kitchen at 4 in the morning with a knife in her hand and looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "All right. On 3 conditions, and I want them in the document, not in a conversation." The first was a profit pool. 11% of group operating profit, distributed annually to the kitchen staff of all 12 houses. By name. In a schedule attached to the deed, 41 names,
starting with Ru Byung-chul. The second was that the operations manual would be reissued within the year, with every one of those 41 names in it and the author line corrected. She said, "Your mother keeps her apartment, her pension, and her seat on the board." He said, "Talia." And she said, "I am not spending the rest of my life married to a man who threw his mother out of his father's company for me. Neither of us would survive that. She keeps the seat. She just does not keep the votes." Jung Min-taek redrafted all three into the deed by 11 o'clock that morning. The revocation notice was delivered to the chair of Myongwol Holdings at 4:40 in the afternoon on Thursday the 23rd of April, by registered post and by hand at her office in Jongno. Madame Oh Seon-yong read 4 paragraphs and understood every legal consequence of them inside about 90 seconds, because she was not, and had never been, a stupid woman. The signing with Chungwoo Food Holdings was scheduled for 10 o'clock on Friday the 24th of April, in the boardroom on the 3rd floor in Jongno. Madame Oh Seon-yong arrived at 20 to 10 in dove gray, immaculate on time, and took the chair at the head of the table, because there was nothing in that letter that stopped her sitting in a chair. At 2 minutes to 10, Ru Byung-chul came in a suit, and sat down along the side wall, and after him 4 of the young chefs from Yeouido and Pangeo and Anzan in clean whites, who had not been invited by anybody and whom nobody had the standing to remove. At 10 o'clock exactly, Nam Ji-ho walked in with Jung Min-taek and put 3 certified copies on the table in front of the Chungwoo deal lead, and 1 in front of his mother and 1 in front of the board secretary. He said, "Good morning. Before we begin, the shareholder register of Myongwol Holdings was amended yesterday afternoon. I am no longer a shareholder of this company, and I have not been since 3:40 on Thursday. The chair's voting authority was revoked at 4:40 on Thursday. Nobody in this room is able to sell anything today." The Chungwoo deal lead read the top sheet for 11 seconds, which is a very long time in a room like that. Then he asked one question, and he asked it quietly, and everybody heard it. He said, "Who owns it?" And the door opened. Talia Monroe came in at 4 minutes past 10 in a plain gray chef's jacket with her name embroidered over the pocket for the first time in 8 years, because Deja Carter had paid a man in Mangwon 40,000 won to do it overnight. She did not sit at the head of the table. She walked around to the empty seat where the shareholder sits, and she put a hardback notebook down in front of her, and she said, "Good morning. My name is Talia Monroe. I own 100% of Myongwol Holdings as of yesterday afternoon, and the company is not for sale." The room did not erupt, because rooms like that never do. It went completely silent for about 4 seconds, and then the Chungwoo deal lead started, very slowly, to close his folder. He was not angry. He had read the risk index in March and had spent 6 weeks being told by this company that it was not a problem. He stood up, and he buttoned his jacket, and he looked down the table at Madame Oh Seon-yong, and he said the sentence that ended her 4 years. He said, "We valued your kitchen at 65 billion won, ma'am. It appears we were bidding for a person you were not able to name." Then the buyers from Chungwoo Food Holdings walked out of a head office in Jongno without the company they had already told their own board they owned. Madame Oh Seon-yong sat at the head of that table with her hands folded and her back straight and did not move at all. And Talia Monroe opened her notebook to a page she had prepared at 3 o'clock that morning, and said, "Thank you all for coming. There are 41 people in this company whose names are not written anywhere. I would like to start with that." Madame Oh Seon-yong came to the Samcheong-dong kitchen at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, alone in a plain coat, without her driver. Talia Monroe was at the stove with 2 pots going, because it was Saturday and there were 90 covers. Madame Oh said, "My husband gave you his food." Talia said, "No, ma'am. He lent me his food. I have been giving it back every day for 8 years. Madame Oh said, "And now you have his house as well." And Talia Monroe turned the heat down under one pot, and took 2 clean spoons from the rack, and filled the second one, and held it out sideways to the woman standing beside her without looking at her. She said, "It is his stock. Tell me where it is." Madame Oh Seon-yong looked at that spoon for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, no," and turned around and walked out through the corridor, past 12 notes on a wall, and got into a taxi on the main road. Talia put the spoon down and went back to her pots, and told the 3 young cooks who had watched the whole thing to stop staring and pull the mackerel. That afternoon she went into the corridor with a roll of tape and a ballpoint pen and put the 13th thing on that wall. 2 American $1 bills, folded once and pressed flat. And beside them a Myongwol comment card with 4 lines on it in beautiful handwriting. Under both of them, in her own writing, she wrote the date. The 19th of April 2026. The rest of it was mostly paperwork, and it took 11 months, and it was not dramatic at all. Shin Chomin was not dismissed. He was appointed Group Compliance Director, with responsibility for the sponsorship and renewal of every foreign worker in all 12 houses, under one standing instruction written into his contract by the owner personally. Every renewal is filed 90 days early, or he explains why in writing. His office is in Songdo. He takes 3 trains and a bus. The operations manual was reissued the following March in a plain gray binder. On the inside cover, the author line reads, "The Kitchens of Myongwol." And underneath it, in the same size type, are 42 names, in the order in which they joined the company, beginning with Roo Byung-chul, 1987. Talia Monroe's name is 31st. Choi Yeon-soo got her interview in July, 3 months after she had been told the individual was not available. She told her on the record, "I am not a symbol of anything. I am a cook who stayed too long, and then stayed a little longer." Madame Oh Seon-young kept her apartment, her pension and her seat on the board, exactly as the deed required. And once a quarter for as long as she sits on it, she has to listen to the company secretary read out the name of the majority shareholder at the start of the minutes. Nam Ji-ho resigned as chief executive in June and went back to being an architect, which is all he had ever wanted and which nobody in his family had asked him about since he was 19. He designed the 13th Myongwol himself, in Seongsu, in a converted printworks, and he built the kitchen first and the dining room around it, which restaurant architects almost never do. It opened on the 11th of April, which is the founder's date. Talia Monroe was in the kitchen at the opening, in whites, cooking, because she has never once let anybody talk her into standing in a dining room while other people work. And at 11 o'clock that night, when the last table had gone, she took 2 clean spoons from the rack, and filled the second one, and held it out sideways to the woman standing beside her. Madame Oh Seon-young, who was 65 and had come to the opening of her husband's 13th restaurant, in a good coat and had stood at the back for 3 hours, took the spoon. She tasted it. She said, "It is late. It arrives after you swallow." And Talia Monroe said, "Yes, ma'am. It always does on the first night." They were married the following month in the service alley behind the Samcheong-dong restaurant, with the extractor fans off for the first time in 41 years on a Monday when the house was closed. Vera Monroe flew from Houston and cried from the moment she saw the alley. Deja Carter made the speech, which lasted 19 minutes and included the laundromat. Roo Byung-chul, 71, cooked, and would not let the bride into the kitchen once. The 14th Myongwol opened in Houston on Alameda 2 years later. The sign says Vera's in her mother's handwriting, and the menu has 11 Korean dishes and 4 from a garage on Cullen Boulevard. And there is a wall at the back of it with one 10,001 note on it that Talia carried over in her hand luggage. People ask her now, more than she likes, what she would tell a woman who is doing excellent work in a place that will not say her name. She says, "Do not make yourself smaller and do not make yourself secret. Teach it to everybody. Teach it until 40 people carry it out of that building in their hands every night. Because a thing you have already given away, every single day in front of witnesses, is the one thing on this earth that nobody can take back from you." And then she says the sentence a 70-year-old man taught her in a language she could not speak yet, in a kitchen where she was washing dishes for cash. "Food you will not share with the person beside you is not finished yet." If Talia's story reminded you of your own quiet patience, or of somebody you know who has been doing the work under somebody else's name, this is where that story gets to matter. Subscribe if this channel has earned a place in your feed. And stay close, because there are more women like Talia whose stories deserve to be told. And I want to know where you land on this one. If you were standing at the end of that table on Sunday afternoon, with $2 and a note on a brass tray in front of you, would you have walked out and gone home to Houston that week? Or would you have asked the way she did for permission to keep them? There is no wrong answer, and I genuinely want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Thank you for staying to the end. I will see you in the next story.